Hi and welcome to MCAT. I'm Jesse Miller and I am from the University of Montana. I'm a senior majoring in English education. And I'm here with my entire class from English Teaching 442, which is Oral and Media Literacy. And we're here today to talk to you about No Child Left Behind. The purpose of this show is mostly for our benefit, actually. We would like the opportunity to learn more about Montana Community Access Television and learn to use the equipment so that we could possibly use it in our classrooms someday and allow our students, I should say, to do the same kind of project. But it's also to get out into the community and find out what the community knows and what the teachers who are teaching right now have to say about No Child Left Behind. And it gives us an opportunity to learn more about it ourselves, as we're going to be teaching these students soon too. I'm a senior, as I said, and I'm student teaching this spring, so next fall I could potentially be in the classroom. And this has been a really great opportunity to learn more about how this act is going to impact me. We will be having a call-in for part of the show, and we'll let you know the phone number and when you can call in. And we would also like to let you know at this point that we will only be live for the first half hour, and we're still going to continue taping here, and tomorrow at 5 p.m. on Friday the 21st, you can catch the whole show. So if we leave you hanging, we're sorry, and you can catch us tomorrow again. Now I'd like to introduce my panelists. Starting on this side, I have Leah Alanya, and she is also a senior at the university and will be student teaching this spring as well. And this is Mark Smith, and he's a senior. You're a senior?
Correct.
I'm sorry. He's a senior also English teaching. To this side, we have Janice Gore, and she is a special education teacher at Hellgate High School. And we're very glad we have these two here. They're kind of our experts. And we have Dr. Merle Ferrier, who is a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the university. Oh, excuse me, the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling. I apologize. So now I'd like to give each of our panelists a few minutes to say what they have to say about No Child Left Behind. And then we'll give you an opportunity to call in with any questions you have. So Leah, if you'd like to start for us.
Well, I'm not actually going to be speaking in my own voice today. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of people that I've interviewed and people who have expressed their opinions about No Child Left Behind. For the superintendent's protection, I will be telling you his opinion, but I will not be saying exactly who it is. But this is the superintendent's perspective from Missoula County Public School System. And he pretty much outlined what he thought No Child Left Behind was, and then he also outlined some problems. So he states that the basic premise of No Child Left Behind Act is positive in concept but fails in actual execution. All schools should strive to provide every student with the tools and instructions to maximize achievement. Those tools and the types of instruction may vary from child to child, as all students have different needs and different learning styles. So it makes it very little sense to measure them all with the same test and hold them all to the same standards. Some problems that he's been experiencing with the No Child Left Behind Act is that it's largely an unfunded mandate, which means that it's necessary for him to implicate this in his school, yet he doesn't get any money to actually help with, for example, with testing, helping his students become better test takers and stuff like that. So the second one I think is actually a little bit funny is that he expresses his concern that to mandate all students will achieve at the same level is akin to saying that all defense attorneys will win all their cases, as will all prosecuting attorneys, that all doctors will cure all their patients, and that every 7th grader will run a mile in under 7 minutes. So he's talking about the impossibilities of No Child Left Behind. Another thing he talks about is special education, and that the schools cannot use the National Normal Reference Test to identify children eligible for special education, but turn around and mandate that we use those same national norm references tests to assess them. So obviously that's a little bit difficult when you have students with special needs having to perform at grade level. He talks a lot about annual yearly percentage rates, which is really hard for, as we can see that it's really hard to have all the students testing above grade level. And so he sees a lot of problems with that, especially in his school. And he says that annual yearly percentage is one distorted measure and may, or more commonly may not, be an indicator of a school quality. Case in point, there are schools that have met rigorous standards and inspections by the U.S. Department of Education over the course of a full year to qualify as a blue ribbon schools and then fail to make the annual yearly percentage. So we appreciate his perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Mark, do you have some things you'd like to share?
Yeah, I really speak on behalf of other students in my position when I say that I am going to be an educator in this country in the near future, that I am very scared of the No Child Left Behind Act for many different reasons. But first of all, what scares me the most about No Child Left Behind is that it really decreases the amount of exceptionality that we can see in our students. If we're all to meet the same standards, obviously we've seen in the past that this is pretty much an impossibility, that everybody achieves on different levels and people achieve at different times in their lives. And to hold people to certain standards at certain times, it just doesn't make much sense to me, and it really scares me. It really makes me feel like I wish to not join into our public school systems because of this. I, as any other teacher coming out of school, have learned that students are very special people and they need to be treated in very special ways. And if we're to be held to just state standards, it doesn't make sense to me on how we can jump the bridge or create higher standards on our own rather than relying on our government. It just seems like one less thing that I think our government should have control of in education. And another thing that scares me is that it is an unfunded mandate. And I really think that it is something that has come out to cover up the fact that our schools are poorly funded at this moment and they aren't being planned to be funded any better in the future. And I think that's the first step that we should take if we were to create a reform of education, is in our funding and is in our basically in our expenditures in education.
All right, thank you. Before we hear from a couple of people who have actually had to conform to the standards of No Child Left Behind, I'd like to read you a piece from President George W. Bush's foreword to the act. And what he says is, he starts off the act by saying that he's a father and he's the wife of a teacher and he's been through school himself. So obviously he knows a little bit about the educational system. But then he goes on to say, because I believe every child can learn, I intend to ensure that every child does learn. My administration put forward a plan called No Child Left Behind, based on 4 principles: accountability for results, local control and flexibility, expanded parental choice, and effective and successful programs. We are pursuing these principles because too many of our schools fail to help every child learn. Now, the Act goes on to say that the overall goal of No Child Left Behind is to have all students, 100%, achieving at grade level by 2014. Between now and then, states, districts, and schools must take a series of specific steps towards that goal. The law requires that they focus intensively on challenging academic standards in reading, math, and science, and test based on them, accountability for the performance of every child, and the guarantee of a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. Although all schools are subject to No Child Left Behind goals and reporting requirements, only the schools receiving Title I federal funds will be subject to specific requirements for corrective action, unless a state chooses to extend them to non-Title I schools. So with that in mind, Mrs. Gore, we'd like to hear what you have to say.
All right. Well, I don't think anyone can argue with the intent of No Child Left Behind. Certainly we want to help all of our students gain, the highest of their abilities. And I don't think there's one single public school teacher that would argue that. It's just in the way that this act, like has been said by many people today, treats everyone the same. And the idea that we can get 100% of our students to achieve grade level is just kind of ridiculous. It's not really possible. One of the things, Hellgate, for instance, did not achieve its adequate yearly progress last year, and the major reason for that was because of attendance. We didn't have the necessary number of students taking the test the date that it was given. When you look at this kind of thing, attendance is a huge problem in our high schools today. And we don't have the backup, and this No Child Left Behind does not provide any funding to provide the backup that we need to do our jobs. One of the biggest problems here in Missoula is that students are not attending, and that the Justice Department isn't following through with truancy laws. If the students aren't making it to school, it's impossible for us to teach them. It's impossible for us to test them when it comes time to testing. At this point, when students are absent for 10 days, we turn their name in for truancy to the county attorney, and there is very little follow-up. There's no truancy officers to bring kids to school. There's no consequences to parents. The minimum consequence for parents at this point is a $5 fine for not sending their children to school. So we're having a great deal of difficulty just getting them to school to teach them. And that's not even taking into account the problems of bringing 100% of our students up to grade level. So there's a lot of problems with this legislation at this point.
All right, thank you. Dr. Ferrier, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, I think I'll make some philosophical comments regarding No Child Left Behind. Some 200 years ago, 13 states met for the purpose of considering whether they could unite under one central power, under a federal government. And the issue at hand wasn't so much whether it was beneficial to do that, because that philosophy was well understood, that the whole perfects the parts. And so the question wasn't whether we should unite as a federal government. The question was, would it be possible to create a central government that had the power to enhance those things that pertain to the whole, but limit their power on the things that pertain to the individual states, and in the words of the Constitution, the individual people. So the question was, did the people who were there at that time have the ability to draft such a document? And after meticulously working over all of the different powers that would belong to a united government and serve the common good, and separating those from the powers that should be reserved to the states and to the individual people, we came up with the Constitution. This Constitution then was voted upon with some skepticism, but it was so well done that it was believed that this Constitution had identified those things, those characteristics of our country that would be best served on the federal level, and separated and denied that power to this common government. So, for instance, there is nothing perhaps more obvious than national defense belongs to the authority of the federal government. And the Constitution acknowledges that by saying it's the only reason the federal government can even go in debt, is to provide for a national defense. So Rhode Island has the power to call the entire military might of the United States governments to its shores to defend itself. An example of an individual power, the exact opposite of defense, is education. I can go to war and defend all of you, but I can learn for none of you. Individual education always occurs at the personal level. And that's why we have IEPs and special ed, individual education plan. Education by its very nature was reserved for the states and for the people, not because the states were fighting, trying to save powers for themselves. There was no federal government at that time. It was saved for the states for the purpose of enhancing education. It is not a federal, it's not within the power of the federal government to improve education. The very philosophy that gives us No Child Left Behind is exactly contradictory to the philosophy that created that power. The education has to be reserved for the states, or it will no longer be education. The federal government can train people, You know, nations have trained people over and over and over, but a nation of this size cannot educate people. And so even when it's reduced to the state level, most states did like Montana and said, no, the state isn't going to really run the nuts and bolts of education. It will go to the individual school districts where the children and the parents live and can make those decisions. The degree to which the federal government becomes involved in education, no matter how lofty the goals, is the degree to which we will lose what we understand to be education.
All right, thank you very much. Now that you've heard a little bit from everybody, we'd like to open up the phone line. If you would like to call in and have a question or a comment, we would love to hear from you. And while we wait for our first caller, we have a video clip from Dr. Rhea Ashmore, who is a professor of literacy studies at the university. And she had some great comments about the act. And so we'd like to share with you her thoughts on the act being a good name but no bad law. And so, okay, now that you've had the phone number, we're going to go ahead and give you that clip.
Great name. Yeah, it's a wonderful name, No Child Left Behind, but it's a bad law. Why is it a bad law? Number one, the accountability on schools and students to do well based on one assessment. And number two, the mandate for teacher quality. I just read in the Missoulian yesterday with the mandate for teacher quality. Outstanding Teachers of the Year. A Millikan Award winner under No Child Left Behind would have been deemed, or would be deemed, unqualified. Now, there's something wrong with that. Number two, there was the article in the Missoulian in August where Superintendent Linda McCullough had to report on schools that did not pass No Child Left Behind guidelines, and over 100 schools, quality schools, did not pass. Why did not they pass? There's over 50 different criteria that are used to determine if or if not a school passes. If one of those areas is deficient, for example, at Lewis and Clark, they did not have 95% of the students taking the standardized test. They had 94%. All the other criteria were positive, but because of that one area of attendance, they were on the list as not passing. And if the school continues to be on the non-passing list, in the long run, that school can be taken over and run by the state. Yeah. So it's totally unrealistic. How schools and students are being evaluated, again, totally unreliable and unrealistic. Every single professional group talks against high-stakes testing. No significant decision should ever be based on one test alone. Yeah. On one test alone. Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like we have a caller, so we'll find out what they have to say. Maybe not. Okay, stand by, we're having technical difficulties. Okay, let's try again. Hi, welcome to MCAT, thank you for calling. Do you have a question or comment for our panel?
Am I on the air right now?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know what it is that you're objecting to as regards the testing standards in the No Child Left Behind legislation. What is the objection to, if you would more fully, what is the objection to children testing at grade level? All children that can test at grade level, why should they not be required to do so? And what are the standards we're looking for? Are we looking for a child who can, for instance, write a sentence? Are we looking for a child who topic. I'll hang on and listen to your, or I will hang up and listen to your answer.
Okay, well, thank you very much for calling. Would anyone in particular like to answer that?
I'll take a try at it. Thank you. It's a very good question, and it's a very logical question of why would educators be opposed to not having children achieve grade level. First of all, there is no such thing as grade level. Grade level is a terminology that was invented by statisticians to define how far a test taker is from the average score in that class. So for instance, a ninth grader, second month, who scored average on that test would be at grade level. They'd be at ninth grade second month. Students who scored higher than that, which would be half of all test takers, then would be ninth grade over second month. Students who score below that, which would be the other half of the test takers, then would be said to be below grade average or grade level. To say that a ninth grader second month is at eighth grade third month is not accurate, and in no way reflects that that student is at eighth grade reading level. It just means that on that test, for whatever validity the test had, they scored below average. It doesn't tell you how far below average, it only tells you how many people they scored below. You have no idea from that score whether they scored close to the other people or a long distance from the other people. There is no fourth grade second month across the nation. It's just a relative positioning on a normal distribution so that you can get a sense of how far you were from the average test taker, not the average score, but the average test taker. So people can be scoring below grade at level, and in fact half of all fourth graders will always score below grade level. To say that we must get 100% of the people above or at grade level is impossible, because grade level just shifts wherever the average goes. So the average on the test is grade level, and by definition half are below and half are above. This is the problem with No Child Left Behind's mandate for testing. They require an impossibility. They want half of the people who scored below average to come up, but you can't get half of the people to come up because the average just moves and they always stay behind. It doesn't tell you they're below grade level.
Thank you. That was a good answer.
It sounded like he was also interested in the testing and in what makes the testing what it is. Is it that the student can write a sentence or write a paragraph? And I just can't understand how these tests, and I'm not familiar exactly how these assessment tests are formed or created. Do you know about these tests and how they're administered, what their criteria are, and how they give the results that they do?
These tests are generated for the most part by national companies. I've worked on grants and I've looked at several states' tests in mathematics. Some states have very rigorous tests, some states have very easy tests. It doesn't matter about the level of the test. You still have an average score and you still have half below and half above average. It's like the hot dog in front of the dog that's pulling your wagon. You never quite catch it. And so there is no such thing as a national curriculum. There is no such thing as a Montana curriculum. There are standards in Montana that can be met through a variety of curriculums, and you cannot test the standards. You can only test them indirectly through the curricula, and every school district has the option, every board of trustees has the ability by law to select the curricula they want. And so it's impossible to write a test that would adequately test even all students in Montana, much less all students in the nation.
I think, if I might add, one of the most harmful effects of the No Child Left Behind when it comes to testing is that if the students don't test at grade level, or for some specific reason, if you only have like 98% attendance for the test, the effects of the testing is what's most important, is that schools that are in the most need, who have students who aren't meeting at grade level, they actually have their funds taken from them as it seems like in the act, almost as punishment. And Sweden and other people who have, other countries who have looked at this policy have seen that accountability is important, for our country. It is important for our defense. But we should not punish the people who are doing the worst. We should actually send in reinforcements to those schools to boost education in those areas, to bring those children up, not punish them by saying, if you don't do perfect on this test, you know, we're going to punish your school. It's almost take the test results and what their effects are and work from that and saying, this school needs help in math and science. I mean, there's even, your school can even fail if you don't have the right amount of attendance for the test. So when you say a school is failing, it doesn't necessarily always have to do with academics, which is, this act is about this thick. So it's got a lot of information in it with, in response to high stakes testing and stuff like that.
I agree. Okay, we have about 3 more minutes left, and so we're going to go ahead and answer another call here. Hello? Hello, do you have a question or comment for us?
Hello?
Hello?
I do have a question for you. I was wondering where states' rights come into this, and because I've heard that states are allowed to make their own tests, and the states are allowed to choose whatever they would like on the tests and how they assess the students. And so I was wondering how you can argue against that. If every state has the right to choose what they want to put on there and choose what is passing and what meets the standards, how can you argue against something like that? Because the only thing that's holding us back as states for making this work is not writing our own tests and buying tests from companies. It has the potential to be a very good act. And I was just wondering what the panel thinks of that. And if states had the potential to write their own tests, and if they actually did it, how would it work out?
Okay, thank you for your question. We're going to go ahead and answer that really succinctly, and then we're going to have to go off the air live. So if one of you would like to answer that in about a minute and a half.
Montana can't afford to write its own test. It's a multi-million-dollar project to write your own test. And so what Montana has to do is rely upon a major test maker who takes a look at our standards and from that attempts to pull questions out of their data bank that somehow match our standards. In general, the tests are not, they're not specific to Montana in any way.
Okay, thank you. We have about 2 minutes left, and so I'd just like to remind all of our viewers that we're going to have to cut the live show short now, and we will continue taping here though, and the show will re-air tomorrow, Friday the 21st at 5 o'clock, and so please catch the rest of the show then, and thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching this tomorrow, don't watch it Saturday because it won't be on. But real quick before we're cut short, we'd like to give you the contact information for our local legislators so that you can write to them and tell them how you feel about No Child Left Behind.
In any particular course that they might have been teaching possibly for years.
Okay, in just a minute here, we're going to go ahead and continue with some questions. And if you would like to continue to call in, you can. You just won't be live. And so you can call in and ask us a question, and we can answer it, and you can watch tomorrow to see the answer.
At their grade level by the year
And again, we appreciate you tuning in to this. Our class has been working on this for quite a while now, and so it's been a joy to use MCAT's equipment and to learn more about the program. Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and continue with the show. Again, there's the phone number just before we go off, and please do continue to call if you have a question or a comment. Okay, I guess while we're waiting for the phone to ring again, I have a couple questions here. First of all, Leah, I know you talked to a teacher from Austin, Texas who wished to remain anonymous, and would you like to share her comments with us?
Sure. Yeah, this is a teacher from Austin, Texas, which is
So as a student
a bigger city than Missoula, Montana, obviously, and has a lot more, No Child Left Behind, I guess, is running full force there, as opposed to our rural areas where things, where I'm sure it will be picking up in the next few years, but the ruralness of our community makes it a little harder to enforce. So she specifically said about Austin, she's a third grade self-contained teacher, which I think means special education. And she says what is not effective about No Child Left Behind is actually the pace at which teachers are expected to teach and the amount of content that is expected to be covered. In addition, there is a pressure to stay in the line with the IPGs, which are instructional planning guides. There's no energy left to be creative. As a third grade teacher, there's immense pressure because if my students do not pass the third grade reading exam called the TASC, Texas Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, they are retained. Again, let me remind you that most of my kids did not start this year out at grade level. The continuum of levels is the most challenging aspect to my job, and figuring out how to address each level so that they can pass the test. Students get a total of 3 attempts if needed, but from day to day we are aware of that, but they are aware of the pressure. This is a difficult balance to find. How can we get them, meaning the students, to enjoy reading and yet handle the anxiety of the test to come? We spend a significant amount of time on testing strategies and format, or else students will struggle with the test regardless of their reading ability. We test frequently under the pretense that assessment drives instruction, which I believe to agree. However, there is a lot of testing going on. 9-week tests, benchmarks, practice tests. It can be too much and exhausting, and even veteran teachers complain. She also said that when I asked her, how is No Child Left Behind affecting your classroom and teaching style? She says this: my teaching style is frantic. There is just too much material to cover and performance statistics to worry about. I do my best to not show my kids this, yet I find myself saying that they will fail if they do not despise themselves. I loathe this. Learning is not about fear. It's about exploration, creativity, interest, and understanding oneself, one's setting, and personal goals. So I think that's really important, and I appreciate the long distance comment because this affects Montana and teachers beyond.
All right, thank you. That brings up a good point that I'd like to find out more from all of you, is that here in Montana we have mostly small schools, and one of the things about the act is that it allows parents to choose the school that they send their students to. And if the school that their children attend isn't passing the standards, then the parents can choose for that child to go to another school. And that failing school district has to allocate money to help that child get to the school if transportation is required and to be educated there. And here in Montana, we don't have that option. It's very seldom that the students have another school to choose from. So how do you all think that this act affects us here in rural Montana as opposed to the big city?
Well, I think that it's wonderful that we're in rural school districts, because I don't believe that children should be jumping from schools to schools. Rather, I think that our federal government should be investing in these schools to become better. If they are a problem school, why isn't our federal government investing to create higher education standards in there, rather than holding purely on accountability of the school's test scores? It really makes no sense to me. And more so, this scares me more than anything else, is, a school is created by its students and by its faculty and by students learning. And from what this teacher in Austin, Texas is saying, that students are merely learning to pass a test. And that scares me, that these students aren't learning on a really good retention level, lessons and things that they will take on and hold for the rest of their lives, but merely something to pass a test. And that just isn't learning to me. That's not how I've been taught to teach students. If we were to learn like that or to teach like that, we might as well use book publishers' quizzes, and we might as well have a monkey stand in front to administer it. We need teachers that care. We need teachers that want to put in the time and the effort to engage students and to have students actually really learn and take these things on and formulate ideas about the lessons that they are learning and create retention levels that aren't merely to be regurgitated on a test. It's just I don't understand how this can if a school cannot pass this or cannot pass the assessment test, that the student could just up and leave the school and the school's left held accountable for this. If the government is in charge of our schools, then aren't they accountable? Is my question.
Okay. Ms. Gore, would you like to comment on this as a local teacher?
Yes, well, in Missoula, we do have open enrollment in our schools, and students can choose which school they want to go to. We, at this point, are not doing vouchers where if a student decide, if our school isn't meeting the standards, then they can choose to go to Loyola or a private school or some other kind of school. I don't think we're ever going to have that in Montana. We don't have the population for it. One of my big concerns in Montana in terms of population, and I'm kind of changing track here, is the whole idea of highly qualified teachers and the ability to have what No Child Left Behind defines as highly qualified teachers. As a rural state, especially in very small towns, teachers in the high schools teach many different subjects, and No Child Left Behind requires that teachers be certified in each of the areas that they're teaching. Well, you can imagine that in a small town with 50 students in the high school, each teacher cannot be certified in each of the subjects in which they're teaching. And this also happens in the field of special education where, for instance, I could be teaching at a high school a special education resource class in English and one in math and one in vocational skills throughout the day. And with No Child Left Behind, I'm expected to be certified, college certified in all those areas. So I think Montana is going to see a lot of problems with the whole issue of having highly qualified teachers by the No Child Left Behind definition.
Thank you. Any other comments on the subject?
Could I comment just a bit more? I thought maybe I was out of time on that last lady that called.
Yeah, absolutely.
And her question was, why would we be opposed to like a state-created test and then look at our state kids and then have all of them do well on that? And of course, nobody's opposed to that. And there's really nothing in No Child Left Behind that's new, at least to Montana educators. The goals in No Child Left Behind have been the classroom goals and the school district goals in Montana since its inception. There, I guess, one exception. No Child Left Behind requires every school to send the name, phone number, and mailing address of every junior and senior to the U.S. military. And that has never really been a goal of Montana education, but it is of the federal government. The problem with the testing is this, and I'll use higher ed as an example. Higher ed it falls under a slightly different act, but basically the same idea. In Montana, for the sake of illustration, let's say there are 8 schools that prepare teachers. The students, the graduates from those schools will be required to take a mandated test. It doesn't matter who makes it, it doesn't matter how easy or how hard it is. Those schools will still end up with average test scores, and they'll be ranked from 1 to 8. Then by definition, the bottom fourth, which would be 2 schools in this case, will be labeled automatically, regardless of their scores, low-performing schools. Those 2 schools will have to stamp all over their brochures and their literature and so forth, low-performing school. Now, let's just say the lowest-performing school in Montana has a student average on this test of 90%. Next door in another state, let's say their highest school has an average of 85%. Our lowest performing school, which has to go around with a stamp on its forehead saying low performing school, is outscoring our neighboring state's highest performing school, and they're going around with the label high performing school. The problem with this testing is it guarantees there will always be a percentage of failure. Hence, the government will always be able to say, we have low-performing schools, therefore they need our intervention. The federal government is not capable of fixing low-performing schools. I would have no opposition to a state test if we had a state curriculum. We don't have a state curriculum, so it makes no sense to give a statewide test. But I certainly have every opposition in the world to the federal government coming in with its understanding of accountability and trying to hold Montana citizens to a level of accountability that the federal government has yet to have demonstrated in anything it's accountable for.
Thank you very much. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and go on to another question. Lisa Blank and Carol Brewer, who are two professors at the university here in Missoula, recently had an article published in the Ecological Society of America magazine, and it's all about No Child Left Behind and specifically how it affects students in the science classroom and the teachers who are teaching science classes. And they have a statement that says, "Learning in order to know should not be separated from learning in order to do." And I thought this was a really interesting statement, and I just wanted to kind of throw it out there on the table and see if any of you had any comments on this, what you think, if you agree or not.
And I think it jumps kind of into what I was saying before, that I don't think kids are in school to pass a state assessment test, but to learn and to achieve on their own. In no way can a state statistic on an assessment test mark a student's achievement by any means. I really feel that one's achievement is meant by what they do and what difference they make and what work and production that they do for themselves and for their community and for the people around them. And you know, that's why we go to school, and that's why we learn, to better ourselves and to take us on into a future, not to pass a grade, not to pass a state assessment test, not to get a high score on the SATs. We're here to learn, and we're here to retain what we learn, and so that it may make us better people in the future and prepare us for a future. And I can admit that I was never the strongest student when I was in high school, but I am in college, and that is something that I have adjusted to because I was more open and willing to learn when I was in college, or I was more inspired to learn when I was in college. And in high school, my mind was on other things. And I think that people develop like that at different stages and periods in their lives, and that's what education is here for. It's not for to be looked at as an assessment or to be looked at as a statistic, but as an individual aspect of where this person may be going with their life and how positive changes from learning in that person's life can take them forward.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's also important to take into account why students might be failing. I know, for example, I do a lot of observing of teachers, and I've noticed that certain students who don't do well might necessarily be hungry. They might not have the best home environment. Some of them have a lot of different home situations that contribute to failing as well and having a really hard time paying attention to school. So we'd like to teach students to become good citizens and nurture that learning aspect of them, but we're also there to provide a really wonderful, warm, and structured environment for them to learn and to further themselves. And I think some parts of No Child Left Behind don't take into account other aspects of our government that could oppress or suppress certain students from actually making their potential. And especially since No Child Left Behind affects Title I funds, that specifically targets free and reduced lunches and special education programs and stuff like that. So when a school fails, they in essence take away, you know, what helps certain students to just actually get by and do their best. So it really worries me sometimes what the assessment is actually, how valid it actually is.
It's like Hellgate High School having to cut their creative writing program. That's not beneficial to students. And you know, if we really want students to learn, we need to have these programs. And these programs need to be funded in our public schools. because without them, we're no better than where we started. And the more cutting of these programs and the more budget crises that our public schools go through, and if No Child Left Behind continues to roll, and students can be punished, or schools can be punished for not providing high enough scores, well, I mean, you may eventually see schools closing, and you may see the privatization of schools, and that would be a very sad day in this country if that happened. I really just think that this No Child Left Behind is a way for the government to continue to criticize the public school system, which they are in control of, which really, that's what creates most of my confusion about it. If we had a politician, and if we had a president or a governor who would commit themselves to funding education the way it should be funded, then I think that that is the best way to start at a goal to achieving higher success in schools, rather than to simply hold back and criticize what's happening in our schools. And you can see it all over the country. It's not just a Montana problem. It's everywhere. Schools have budget crises. Schools are cutting programs. And it just seems that it is more harm than it is good to our schools. And the better we could fund them through legislature, and the better we could foster what's happening in our public school systems, instead of criticizing it, I think the better off we'd do. You can't ever help anything by being negative towards it. By being positive and working collaboratively together, we can create something that is much better and more fostering for our youth.
By nature, these tests are going to test things that have right or wrong answers to them. And so I think we're not looking at higher levels of knowledge or deeper thinking when we look at this. And I think that's what they were talking about in science. We want to teach kids to be able to think and to come to conclusions. And that's a really difficult thing to test in a standardized kind of test. Standardized tests are difficult for certainly for students with disabilities. Most students with disabilities or many students with disabilities are not at grade level, and by nature are never going to be at grade level. So to expect them to achieve grade level scores is difficult. It's also difficult for some of our minority students who don't test well just culturally because they like to stop and think and are much slower in making decisions than what a quick right-wrong answer test has for us. So I'm not sure that we're really teaching how much a student has learned in school by a set of 30 questions with right and wrong answers in them.
So then, can I ask you, do you feel that because of No Child Left Behind, teachers are having to teach to the test more than teaching the material now?
Well, I think that that's certainly happening around the country. I'm not seeing yet that at Hellgate, but I did teach in Texas, and I was not that teacher, but I did teach in Texas 10 years ago, and I did see a major push to teaching people how to take tests, to teaching to the test much more. I hope we don't see that.
God, that's just scary. When we start doing that, are we really teaching? Are we really educating? Or are we just preparing? And in other ways, it's just creating this government curriculum, and that, to me, is even more scary. I think staying on the local level and within the communities where our curriculums are made, especially with the cultural identities around this country, especially with Montana and this identity of a Native American culture that I would assume would be lost at the government curriculum.
Albert Einstein defined education as what you have left after you forgot everything you learned.
It's a good one.
Education is a quality of life, and all attempts to quantify qualities always fall short. And to base something as serious as funding upon a quantified attempt at deciding how much education someone has is extremely limited. It's almost impossible in education to comply with the scientific-based research that is required in No Child Left Behind. Every administrator has to have scientific-based research in order to justify their funding. Interestingly, the private providers who then will come in and tutor the children in failing schools don't have an obligation to furnish scientific-based research. The word scientific is left out of it. They only have to have research, presumably then unscientific-based research. The Title I thing here in No Child Left Behind is 20% of the school's Title I funds will be taken from the school in effect and given to private providers to tutor students in low-performing schools. That makes sense to most people until you find out it's not the students who have the low scores that will be tutored. It's the students that have low incomes that will be tutored, who may or may not be the ones with the low scores. You don't have to look too far into this to find the ideals have always been present in Montana education. We don't leave children behind. In the federal concept of this, by definition, you will leave X% of the students behind on every test. A test is not graded by how well you did on the test. A test is scored by how well you did relative to someone else. Just like a track meet, there will always be a 5th place. Doesn't mean the person was low performing, it means they placed 5th. It in itself doesn't tell you how well that person did in the track meet.
Thank you. That's a good analogy. If we could, I'd like to show another clip from Dr. Ashmore on what she believes is the dilemma, of administrators because of this act.
Therefore, the faculty, we don't have a faculty member to teach. Therefore, we don't have a faculty member to teach English, a faculty member to teach math, a faculty member to teach science. According to No Child Left Behind, a teacher is considered qualified only if they have earned their licensure and or major in the topic that they're teaching. So in a rural high school, where the social studies teacher may teach history and world history and a variety of courses, according to No Child Left Behind, they'd have to have a major in every one of those subsets, even though in the state of Montana, licensure in broad field sciences is permissible. So it's very important that we stick strong to our state constitution, where we say that if a student is licensed, or they can teach. I was informed that a special education teacher will be deemed not qualified by the No Child Left Behind standards to teach science and reading because they don't have a major in that, even though they're licensed in special ed. How can a state like Montana, that does not have that many teachers, that does not have
Closing comments, if you have any.
I guess what I'd like to say is that I feel like I'm going to be a good teacher, and I really am passionate about what I do and how I teach, and I think I have good intentions as a teacher, but I was speaking with a few teachers the other day, and they told me specifically that I wouldn't, if I was to work in Montana, I would technically be one of the first people fired if there ever came a time to cut the budget, which normally happens on a yearly basis, because I'm only qualified to teach English literature to middle school and high school students. So since I don't want to go back to school at this point right now to get certified again in another subject area, since I'm very passionate about English literature, I run a risk in teaching, and I run a risk at every school since I'm only certified in one area. And I'd just ask that people out there understand that, you know, teachers aren't doing this for the money. Teachers are doing this because they have a real genuine desire to help kids and help the community, and that you don't punish people for only being interested in necessarily one subject. So just on a personal note, I just ask that you think about what certified means, and think about what our school systems are thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Anyone else?
I just think I'd like to, when people of our government, people of our legislature, people of our community to take a step back and really look at what the parameters of this act is, and and take a second to think about what actual education is, and what learning is, and how one develops in education, how one develops in their life. And it's not by testing, and it's not by assessment. It's through learning, and that's the goal of education is learning. And with qualified teachers like we have today, I don't see how we could go through such an act and destroy what could be a wonderful system of education if funded correctly.
Thank you.
Well, I would just like to see the focus of educational improvement be on helping children, and I think that was the intent of No Child Left Behind. But I think the money that is being spent on testing and the money that is being spent on a great deal of paperwork could better be spent in the classrooms directly working with children. I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's not enough information going out to teachers about specifics about No Child Left Behind, and it's very difficult to implement at this time, and as a classroom teacher.
I'd just like to briefly comment on the accountability issue. If you're opposed in any way to No Child Left Behind, it's presumed you're trying to duck accountability. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any government employee who is held to a higher level of accountability than a public school educator. Your first level of accountability, if you've ever taught even one day in a classroom, is the child in your classroom. You feel an instant accountability to that child and each and every one in your room. You move each and every one along at whatever pace you can direct them. You then move up a level of accountability to their parents. Their parents will come in and meet with you if there's problems. You're held accountable to them. You're held accountable to your principal. You're held accountable to your superintendent. You're held accountable to the school board. And if you want a 2% raise, you're held accountable to the community if the school district has to run a mill levy or something. There's a tremendous level of accountability at the public school system. And to say because you're opposed to being held accountable to the Secretary of Education is somehow in opposition to accountability is ludicrous. There's no reason in the world you should be held accountable to the Secretary of Education, and in fact we never had one until just recently. The Jimmy Carter administration was the creation of the Department of Education. So the United States did fine without the Department of Education. Rod Page on his homepage claims he has spent the federal government has spent $341 billion since Lyndon Johnson on education, and they have nothing but failing schools to show for it. I think they are the ones who should be held accountable for spending $341 billion of your money on something that produced no fruits. Had that money been given back to the states to spend as the states saw fit, we would have had a much more efficient use of the money. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today, specifically our two teachers here who have taken time out of their own schedule to come. And just want to thank also our viewers for tuning in and watching this show, and want to remind you that, never mind, we're not live, so I guess it won't do me any good to remind you that we'll be playing tomorrow. But at any rate, we want to thank you for tuning in and watching this, and we want to encourage you again to write to our local legislators if you feel very strongly about this issue. And we'd also like to thank MCAT for giving us the opportunity to be here and to use their equipment. All of those who allowed us to interview them, and we appreciated their time as well. And thank you also to our classmate Corinne, who is a little under the weather but did a lot of work for us behind the scenes, and so we want to thank her. And I think we're going to go ahead and finish up with a clip from Rhea Ashmore, who is going to also encourage you to write to our legislators. And thank you.
Representatives in Washington, they're the people who have passed this legislation, which is thousands of pages in length, by the way, and has many writers that no one is even aware of unless they're read, and some of these writers are highly controversial. So it's very important for people to be aware of No Child Left Behind, get the facts, and based on the facts, speak their mind, let their representatives know how they feel.